Calling all beings. Calling all beings.
Hey, what's up, party people? How's it going? I'm DJ from Calling All Beings, and I'm here on a very, very unique night tonight to talk about something a lot of us are tracking, the Karen Reed trial in Massachusetts. Oh, look at that. I have the Bigfoot background on here. And I was curious if any of you, we haven't typically covered things like this on Calling All Beings, but being being the gravity of this case and what the implications are and what has been alleged on both sides, I thought that I would do an episode on it. I've been very, very, so somebody's in the chat. Hey, Dr. Mounts is here. Dr. Tim Mounts, who I believe he is the host of All Things Unexplained. I believe he is down in vacation, Turks and Caicos or something right now. So hello, Dr. Mounts. So I don't know if anybody is going to come on this stream tonight because we are a UFO, Bigfoot, and paranormal show, but we are going to start a new version of this, and I've been fascinated with the Karen Reed trial in Canton, Massachusetts, and I have looked into every angle of this case and listened to all these amazing content creators. And I'm going to start with the Young Jerks, Mike, and all of his guests, Mazza. And there he is on his other end. Thank you, Tim, for chiming in. You might be the only one tonight, but we'll see if somebody wants to chime in and talk about Karen Reed. I can send you a link. I can bring you on the show, or you can join in the live chat and share your thoughts. But I certainly would welcome anyone that wants to have a conversation about it, and I'd send them a Vine. A little about me. I'm 21-year retired military guy from Air Force Special Operations. I was a law enforcement major in college. I have two of my college teammates from Dean College in Massachusetts. One of them is a police chief in Massachusetts now, and one of them is a retired motorcycle officer in Massachusetts now. So I do have quite a... and pardon me, I don't have my green screen on, so that little distraction in the background, but I didn't have time to get the green screen up and running. But in any case, one of my classmates from high school is, let's say that he is sort of at the colonel level in a state police agency. So I have love and respect for law enforcement, despite the fact that I am, as you'll see here, free Karen Reed. So that's my take on it. But you know what? There's a lot of things to talk about in this case. So I'd like to kind of start near the beginning and start kind of work through things and then see, what we come up with as a group. And like I said, if you message me here, if you have a question, throw it up in the chat. And if you would like to come on the show, I can send you a link and then you can join on air and discuss. But yeah, I'm thinking of all the great content creators. Melanie Little, attorney. Melanie Little is an attorney from New York. Mark Betterow has been amazing. Mazza Media from Massachusetts is amazing. I want to say his name is Mike Crawford. Help me out if I'm wrong on that. He's the host of the Young Jerks. He's amazing. Turtle Boy. Oh boy, if you didn't have a Turtle Boy, this case, this might have, Karen Reed might have had to plead. I mean, who knows? He's the one who brought the snowplow driver to the fore, Lucky Lochran. Without him, I mean, he certainly adds a lot of weight to the case. He was a very believable witness. So let's kind of work our way through it and see where we get to. So we know that everybody was together in the bar. We had I guess the two lovebirds who were fighting intermittently, Karen and her boyfriend, the deceased John O'Keefe, who's the victim in this case. And let me put that there. Justice for John. Also, so we've got to put that in there. So it is Brian Higgins. It is Brian Albert, among others. You had Jen McCabe and her husband, Matt, there. And they eventually, so you're thinking that these two don't get along. And what it would have been suspicious to me if I'm John O'Keefe is that they're inviting me back to the house, and yet they're not really close friends. And apparently there had been some beef between Colin Albert, maybe littering beer cans and so forth on the lawn of John, who is probably rather particular about his lawn, and then telling Chris Albert, and then Chris Albert, they made up a name from some cartoon character that's a get off my lawn guy, Never something. I don't know who the character is, so I'm very unfamiliar with it. But apparently they had tagged that name onto to John O'Keefe, which is a perfectly reasonable thing, and probably seeing the attitude that a Colin Albert has, the way that he interacted with Turtle Boy, you could definitely see him flipping the double bird and so forth to John O'Keefe, knowing that not only is he an elder, meaning he's an older person than you, he's also a Boston police officer, as is your Uncle Brian. So that should have triggered something. So when we look at what happened or what is alleged, it is alleged that Karen drops him off there in the area of 12:20 something, and then is tired of waiting for him after 10 minutes and decides to go home. We know she went home because we know that I think even the Commonwealth said that she logged onto the internet at John's house at 12:31, which makes me wonder, because there was so much that was contrived, if they had their timeline established prior to sharing that information in discovery with the defense. So the question is, what happened after that? So then he goes in there, and apparently there had been a text from Brian Higgins back to to Karen Reed about, like, hey, what's up? ? And I can't remember what Karen Reed texted back, but it didn't seem like she wanted to proceed forward, although apparently she had kissed Brian Higgins, something she probably really regrets today, given that she probably didn't know what kind of an individual that she was dealing with. So then we get to the night in question where, or the time in question where supposedly she is, back at her residence, but they think the murder happened around that time. I guess the ME is the one that established the time of death, but at the very least, the prosecution side, the Commonwealth, gave the time of death. But the problem is that Karen Reed would have been back at John's home. Now, as many of the attorneys have said, it seems to stand to reason that if these experts have said there's no way that someone backed their car up at 24 miles an hour and hit this gentleman, and that they would have had to have hit him center mass in order to throw him the 30 feet. It wouldn't have been enough to just hit his arm, because it just would have turned him. It would have turned his body, but it wouldn't have thrown him 30 feet. So that is a big, big issue. So when you have a couple of experts that are alleging that this is not possible, and so obviously all of you know that there are two witnesses that Alan Jackson established in direct testimony direct examination, I should say, that they were neither hired nor engaged by the prosecution nor the defense, and had never spoken with them, but they were hired, paid for, and engaged by a third party who we have to assume is the federal government. One of the original gangsters on this case, other than Turtle Boy, is, of course, Sean McDonough, the former DEA agent who went to high school in Canton. His parents lived there for over half a century, even though he grew up outside of there. And somebody from Mass would have to correct me on where Sean McDonough grew up prior to ninth grade, I think, when he arrived in Canton and went to high school there. In any case, he says that the feds had this case quite early on, as early as February, and the night in question being January 29th of 2022. So my cat is, sorry, Perseus, we got a show going on, buddy. All you content creators, you've all dealt with dogs and cats in the room. They're our family. What are you going to do? Hopefully my cat won't crawl up on here tonight and go in front of the camera and all that. So the things where things get really suspicious, and where my New York and where your Massachusetts BS meter should go off, is because a couple of things. If we didn't know anything else, if we hadn't heard from the experts, but we know that someone is a celebrated Boston police officer, and he wakes up at 6-something in the morning and sees that there is a plethora. There is ambulance. There is fire engine. There are police vehicles outside and flashing lights in front of your home in the early morning hours. You wake up and you see that. There is no way on this earth that any police officer is not going to run outside and go, oh my God, a brother officer from BPD, a junior officer, is dead on my lawn. There's no way on this earth that doesn't happen, unless you don't want to be interviewed by the police that are present. And you know that the police who are present are not going to come and knock on your door and go, Mr. Albert, Officer Albert, can we talk to you, please? Can we talk to you, sir? Yeah, we'd like to get a dead officer from BPD on your lawn. We need to speak to you about that. And then, subsequently, would you mind if we look around your house? Do an investigation. Look for evidence of something. Which clearly, probably all night, if this unfolded the way that we think it does, that there was some sort of an incident down in the weight room, it could have been as something as little as a punch, where the victim, John O'Keefe, fell back, hit his head on a piece of weight equipment, and then, it ended up being the fatal blow that killed him. It could have been very unintentional, and maybe it was. He was never even struck with an object, but in a weight room, everything hurts. There are a lot of, the ends of barbells are sharp objects. The ends of certain dumbbells are sharp objects. There are a lot of things in a weight room that could hurt you if you were falling out of control. And it could be as simple as something like that happened. Totally unintentional. The problem is that when people are drunk and they're aggressive and they're angry, by the time they gather themselves and someone has a fatal wound to what they said was the just to the right of the occipital lobe on the back of the head, the softest part of the skull. I believe that's what Dr. Sheridan, the Irish gentleman, talked about. Well, now you have someone who's dying. And so the true first responder, and a lot of police officers are trained and very skillful in CPR and life-saving techniques, not to the degree, obviously, of EMS, but a lot of police officers have these skills and use these skills and save people's lives with these skills. And if it happened like that, Brian Albert could have just called EMS and said, "Oh my God, this guy, we had a tussle, we were wrestling, we were horsing around in the weight room, and he got hurt." But instead, they didn't do that. And the body ends up out on the front yard, up through those, I don't know what you call those doors that open up into people's backyards. You know what? I'm going to put on some mood music in the background here. Let's see. Where it is. There it goes. Okay. And let me get a drink of water, because anytime you're doing a solo podcast and you have to talk this damn much, you get parched, as you content creators know. And you aspiring content creators can imagine that that's the case. So now the smart person, the first responder, calls EMS, and they come, and you explain it away and say, "Hey man, we had a little bit of a fight, and there was a shove, and he fell, and he's hurt." But instead, the idea comes up on is we have to cover this up somehow. So we've got to concoct a story by which this woman hit him with her SUV, despite that he has zero. Can you see that? Zero injuries that are consistent with being hit by a car doing 24 miles an hour, which is incredibly difficult to back your car up at that speed, because of the fact that the steering mechanism that we're used to using that's in the front of the car is now in the rear of the car because we're backing up. So every input to the steering wheel is really exaggerated. So backing up straight is very difficult. As I mentioned earlier, I come from Air Force Special Operations Command, and they had a tactical driving course that certain squadron members would get to go to, and they would learn skills like that, backing up at high speed, whipping the wheel around, and turning the car, because some special operators get involved in urban environments, suburban or rural environments where tactical driving is necessary to egress the area. I never went through that training. I haven't been there. I've only talked to people that have been to it. So I doubt that Karen Reed would be able to back her vehicle up at 24 miles an hour, even if she had a reason to. What she was acting like that night, and all those phone messages that she left were John were consistent with a girl who's really pissed off with her boyfriend, who was doing something untoward, potentially untoward with regard to text messaging other girls, etc. I don't know what set her off. We don't know what goes on in people's bedrooms and stuff, but we do know that it's not uncommon for women who feel like they're being upstaged or whatever, particularly a woman, and even a man can feel very vulnerable when you're going through the type of medical conditions as Miss Reed was and potentially is, with colitis and having to have a colostomy bag and things that the trooper was making fun of her for, Trooper Mike Proctor, who we'll get to. You feel vulnerable. And if you think that your boyfriend is chatting it up with another woman, you can see how that could bring out anger in a 40-something woman who thinks that, or believes that she referred to him as a pervert. So you have to assume that she learned something of him and involving him and another girl of whatever age, because that evoked her to refer to him as a pervert. We don't know. I'm sure John was an amazing guy. I'm sure a lot of guys, all of us, have done stuff like that we shouldn't have done. It doesn't demonize John, and girls get pissed off and they scream at you and you say, "I'm sorry," and then you don't do it again. So that's that's all we know about that. But this appears to be what has happened, because the experts say this was not, the ME said, I can't characterize it, but it seemed like it was more consistent with some sort of a fight, and the arm seemed more consistent with a dog bite. I think there's some photos online on Reddit of a hunter who was attacked by dogs, and you could see his arm, and then it juxtaposed right next to that is a picture of John O'Keefe's arm, and it looks very much the same. And we all know that. Anybody who's been bitten by a dog, this is all common sense stuff here. I mean, we could say bring in the experts, but this is all common sense stuff. If you get hit with a car going 24 miles an hour, center mass, and your rock glass hits the taillight, I don't care what happens to the taillight, you are going to be seriously bruised. Seriously bruised. Before you expire and pass away, as they alleged he did. You potentially could have internal injuries, fractures, broken bones, definitely massive bruising. So we all know that to be true, but for the sake of discussion, we're going to pretend like we need to really hear. We know this. The abrasions on his nose, above his eyes, consistent with maybe even a boxing glove if somebody was wearing it, and going past his nose, maybe getting hit in the eyeballs, and obviously this injury to the back of his head that Dr. Sheridan is certain what killed him. That the brains, and he read the ME's report, but the brain swelled up. It's consistent with his eyes closing up, and that was the end of his life. She said hypothermia was involved, which means he may have been alive still after that injury, but Dr. Sheridan believes he did not get up and walk after that injury. And that should be very interesting to everybody. This is not to ascribe and pigeonhole and say police are bad, because that's absurd. Without police, we would have anarchy in the streets of every single town, village, and city in America. So that's how important that police are. Without police, we have complete anarchy. We have people shooting one another in neighborhoods outside their house. The thing that keeps most normal, sane people from doing something violent to someone who pisses them off, even in the most minor way. You watch Judge Judy, hear how neighbors have gone at it, right? Is knowing that the police will come and they can lock you up. They can remove you from your freedom. So they are a blessing, but when a police officer abuses his power or her power, they can also be a curse. And now we'll get to Mike Proctor. I'm not going to get into all the locker room language that he used, because I don't think that's particularly important, the language that Mike used. I don't hear my song playing. Maybe you guys do. Okay, I do hear it in the background. It's disgusting language. I can tell you, just to give you my perspective as a former military guy. So I've got 21 years, active duty in the Air Force, working with all services. I played football at Dean College and was in the locker room there. Played semi-pro football. Been part of wrestling. Dabbled around did significant amount of jiu-jitsu and those kind of dojos, and have messed around with a little bit of MMA to know that I'm not good at it. I have never spoken about a girl in those terms in which Mike Proctor used. I'm not saying that probably I haven't had teammates and so forth that have. I have not heard people talk like that, and I don't know what else to say about that. I'm not going to belabor that, because it's not really the point. It just dehumanizes, as he said, it dehumanized Karen Reed. And when you dehumanize people, you can do things to them that you wouldn't normally do if you see them as another person. You will hear in Nazi Germany, you'll see the propaganda that started way back in Austria when Adolf Hitler was in Austria as an artist before he even came to Germany, immigrated to Germany. That type of dehumanizing language and the cartoons and the characters allowed them to see the Jews as subhuman. That allowed them to commit the atrocities that they've used. I had a friend share with me the other day. This was on her Facebook timeline. I don't think it was an individual from our high school. She was an upperclassman to me, but it was someone that was a friend of hers, and it was talking about, I'd like to take all the Democrat libtards out and shoot and kill them. Something like that. So this was a woman saying this. So that type of dehumanizing language in any event will allow somebody to commit acts of violence that you wouldn't normally commit if you saw somebody as similar to yourself. And Karen Reed could be any of us and all of us. And Mike Proctor could be any of us and all of us. But we hope that someone that would commit an act like what we think happened to John O'Keefe, we don't hope that that's many of us. In fact, that would be very, very, very few of us, and hopefully most of those are locked up, although we know that they're not. So let's get to that now. So Mike Proctor arrives, and as I mentioned earlier, never goes and says, knocks on the door. Let me do the knocking sound. See if we can hear it. Pick this up. Hey, Mr. Albert, Officer Albert, it's Mike Proctor. I want to talk to you. How could you not go and knock on the door and say, I want to talk to you? I realize you're a brother officer. I realize we're colleagues. I don't know what the friendship was, but we do know that Brian Albert's nephew, Colin Albert, was the ring bearer at Mike Proctor's sister's wedding. I want to say her name is Courtney. Forgive me if I'm wrong about that. We do know that. So we know because of the wedding photo, Mike Proctor was in there, and so was Colin Albert. Colin Albert was in the house that night. What we don't know is if they had spoken or not. Mike, if there had been any texts or phone calls that had happened, because we never got Brian Albert's phone, and we're going to get to that. How can Mike Proctor not say, I want to talk to, regardless if you think you know what happened at the scene of that house, I need to talk to everybody that was in that house. Everybody that was at that party last night. That includes Brian Higgins, who already went to the Canton Police Department to try to grease the skids over there, and had already had a 22-second phone call with a butt dial, what Brian called a butt dial, and then he actually had a 22-second conversation with Brian Albert, which could have been to go over getting story straight kind of stuff. Very basic, broad stuff. But hey, the police weren't coming and knocking on Brian's door. And that makes me kind of sick, because everyone from that home should have been brought out down to the local state trooper barracks, put in separate rooms, and interviewed about what happened. Every single one of them, including Officer Brian Albert. But that didn't happen, and that's because there wasn't an honest investigation conducted in this case. That makes me really sad, because that would have been the way to determine who actually did something. Right there at the scene, if you thought that this woman did this and she's there at the scene, all you have to do is snap a photo of her car and the taillight, get photos going, a video or photos going all the way around her vehicle. And then you could do official after the fact. After you go and actually seize the vehicle, you could take photos of it as it sits. But they didn't do that. Because if they did that, and people say that's weird, it's not weird. It's smart. If you want plausible deniability, oh, we got somebody in the comments. Hey, Billy Baseball. What are you talking about? I'm perfectly willing to hear you, Billy. If you want an honest investigation, you need to do things like that. You need to document, take photos of the woman's car as it was at her parents' house, and you seize the vehicle. So that way, nobody could question whether or not something happened to the car. You're not taking photos of the car until after the car arrives at the Sally Port. Then how do we know what the condition of the car was? How do we know that she didn't do something to the car? We don't. I'm actually just not familiar. Oh, okay, Billy Baseball. So this is so first of all, thank you for chiming in. This is the Karen Reed trial that's occurring in Canton, Massachusetts. An amazing state, to be sure. And the story is quite simply a 40-ish woman out with her boyfriend, a Boston police officer, Sean O'Keefe, is partying at a beautiful restaurant bar in Canton called The Waterfall with another Boston police officer, a sergeant named Brian Albert, and a ATF agent named Brian Higgins, and some other wives and girlfriends, husbands and wives and so forth that were there. And so there was, 10 or so odd people. I actually could have brought up that graphic of who was there. At one point, there was some chatting going on between Brian Higgins, the ATF agent, and John O'Keefe's girlfriend, Karen Reed, and there was apparently a kiss that happened. After that, they went back to the home of Brian Albert, the Boston police sergeant in Canton, to party or have an after party from the party, and John O'Keefe was invited. So what Karen Reed says is, I went over there, I dropped him off. I didn't want to stay. He said he would go in for a few minutes. So 10 minutes went by, and she was pissed off, so she drove home and hoped that he would either call for a ride home or get an Uber, or maybe somebody would drive him. There were a lot of people at the party. Jen McCabe and her husband, Matt McCabe, who are kinfolk to the Alberts and so forth. So the next morning, oh shit, a kiss, right? Well, it just shows that there could have been something between the ATF agent and John O'Keefe if he was aware that the ATF agent, Brian Higgins, was making eyes at his girlfriend. The bottom line is that Karen Reed goes home to John's house, looking after the children there, and sends a bunch of texts to him about how pissed off she was because he didn't call her. They believe that the time of death was around 12:30. At 12:31, Karen Reed was logging on the internet at his. They have her phone logging on the internet at John O'Keefe's home. So he was dead. She doesn't know it. She keeps texting him and not getting a response. The next morning, she wakes up and John O'Keefe is not there. She calls a couple of the women who were at the party. They accompany her back to the Albert residence. John O'Keefe is lying dead on the lawn of Officer Brian Albert's house. So 2 brother officers, one owns the home and has a prominent family in Canton, Massachusetts, and the other officer is dead on the front grass. Here's what's going to get you, Billy. I knew an ATF guy who got stalkerish with someone. I am not trying to generalize or be right. Exactly. I'll tell people, and I guess you've set this up perfectly for me. I come from the military background. The police have their microcosm of people. Society at large, we could go to three-letter agency guys, whether they be FBI. You know, there's FBI guys that are in jail for betraying their country. Aldrich James. You had not only Aldrich James, Robert Hansen, and then I'm trying to think of the woman that was just released from prison, the Cuban American. And in the military, we have many military guys who have committed acts of, let's just say, depraved acts of murder, rape, and everything else, and have used, been nepotistic and so forth, just like what you've seen here in Canton. So one group is not necessarily better than the other. There are good and bad people in all of these different groups, okay? So we know that. So now that we've established that, this is not to say that I am free Karen Reed, hashtag free Karen Reed, hashtag justice for John O'Keefe, is not a statement that I think police are bad, because they're just like all of us. We have people who, people have bosses at work who are reasonably kind and treat them with respect and don't abuse their power over them. And we have other people at any office job anywhere that will abuse their power, that will try to gain favor, that will ruin somebody's career. All these things happens in government. It happens in state government, federal government, law enforcement, military, financial world, you name it. Real estate, right? Hi, Sierra. How are you? Welcome. Bienvenidos. So, well, thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Our show here, yes, DJ is correct. Our show here is Calling All Beings. We normally cover UFOs, Bigfoot, and paranormal. However, we are starting a new endeavor. Man, I can't. Oh man, I want to announce it, but we're going to do a second show with our 4 people. We have my co-creator Nathan, who has a master's in divinity. We have 2 psychology majors, Courtney and Deb. So we have 4 of us, 2 guys, 2 gals. And thank you. I appreciate that, Sierra. I dig it. Thank you for watching. I can't tell you what our new endeavor is. Nathan is going to create the imaging for it this week, and we're going to make an announcement, but it will not be anything like this version of Calling All Beings, which will continue, but we're also going to do a new podcast that will be closer to what we're talking about tonight. I'll put it to that way. So let's get back to the case, because where we were, I know Nathan and Courtney are awesome. Deb is amazing. I'm really blessed to have a great, yeah. Yes, Billy, you were called to be here. Thank you so much. Let's get back to the case here. We were talking about Mike Proctor, who looking forward to, I know James Iandoli. James has been such a blessing. If you didn't know this here, James and I we're not from the same hometown, but he's from probably 9 miles, 10 miles away from me, maybe less. But he lives in my hometown right now. So James and I are quite close. But let's get back to the case. So now we have the dead officer, Boston police officer John O'Keefe, on Boston Police Sergeant Brian Albert's lawn. And we have the state trooper who comes to investigate is a man named Mike Proctor. Mike Proctor, Mass State Trooper, is friends with the Albert family. Colin Albert, the nephew of the homeowner Brian Albert, was the ring bearer at Mike Proctor's sister's wedding. They were both ring bearer and groomsmen there in the wedding photos together. The problem here is how Mike Proctor can honestly say that he never was going to knock on the door of the homeowner in which a dead body was found on that lawn, and he didn't think he needed to knock on the door of the homeowner and say what's going on here. Let's flip that 180 degrees. I am a lifelong or adulthood long police officer. He was a Suffolk County sheriff previously in Suffolk County, Mass. And then he was a BPD and was elevated very quickly to sergeant. And he was on a fugitive recovery team. Brian, the owner of the home, Brian Albert. How does Brian Albert not come out of his home with a dead body there and all these emergency vehicles there? You got a knock. How did not any one of the 10 people or so that were at this party that they alleged the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is alleging she was hit somewhere between 12:20 something and 12:30 something. Forgive me that I don't have those details written down. And that he was dead on the lawn at that time, and Jen McCabe just left and went home. If that's the case, how did none of the party goers, despite there being a blizzard, not see a body on the front lawn? And go, hey, Brian, did you know there's a dead guy on your lawn? I mean, how did that not happen? Secondly, they found, a blogger, and I encourage you guys all to go and check out Turtle Boy Live. Turtle Boy is a former teacher, high school teacher and track coach in Massachusetts who has become an amazing investigative journalist. He is the one that broke this story to the national media, or the national media wouldn't be covering it, and there wouldn't be 1,000 people out in front of the courthouse during deliberations of this case. He found the plow driver who drove by the Albert home after that 12:30 time frame, somewhere in the 1 o'clock hour, and plowed that road because it's a main road. There was nobody in their driveway. Are you sure there was nobody? You sure you would have seen that you had full view of their lawn? He said, I had full view. Yeah, Turtle Boy, you got to go to, Billy. Got to. He said, I had full view of that lawn. There was nobody there. He came back for a second pass in the 2 o'clock hour, I believe, and there was a Ford Edge. Guess who owns a Ford Edge? Brian Albert. That was parked in the street. And the modus operandi of the plow drivers for the Department of Works is to call their supervisor and have the police tow vehicles that are left in the street, because the residents know in Canton, you do not park in the street. You park anywhere but the street when we're plowing. So that's what they do, is they go and they call their supervisor. What Lucky Loughran did is he said, because the Alberts are a family that I'm friendly with, I delivered pizza for them for 8 years, because Chris Albert, Brian's older brother, owns a D&E pizza shop in Canton, and Lucky Loughran worked there part-time. So he, as a courtesy to the family, he did not call his supervisor and ask they tow that vehicle that was in Lucky Loughran's way, even though the driveway, you can fit 6 cars at least in the driveway of the home. After that Ford Edge was moved, that's where the body was found. Take that from what you will. We don't know what happened. We just know that mysteriously, a car that was parked in the driveway, Chris Albert's car, was now moved to the street. And it was moved a little ways down the street near his flagpole. And that's where the body was found. Was that car obscuring a body that had been placed there? Don't know. But the physics experts that were hired by, we assume, are the U.S. government, because they weren't hired by the Commonwealth and they weren't hired by the defense, but their report, these 2 PhDs who do accident reconstruction, their company is called ARCA. They offered their report to, testify on behalf of the prosecution and the defense. Prosecution said, nope, we don't need it. We had Trooper Joe Paul look at the accident. He told us what happened. And then we had these 2 PhDs that are used by the U.S. government, the NHL, and these guys are of the highest regard in this industry. And they said, what you saying happened didn't happen, homie. So step damn back. Okay. So anyway, so that's where we were at. Now, the plot thickens because in addition to Trooper Mike Proctor not knocking on the door and asking Brian Albert, hey, what happened here, A, and B, can I search your home? To which Brian Albert could have said, no, you cannot search my home because you don't have probable cause. To which Mike Proctor could have got a warrant. But that was never going to happen because he knows that family and there was no way he was going to do that. So do you think that they got the cell phones of Mike Proctor, the cell phone of Brian Albert and the ATF agent who potentially could have had beef? Brian Higgins could have had beef with the deceased Sean O'Keefe, Officer Sean O'Keefe. Nope. They did not get those cell phones. What ended up happening is months later, there was a court order mailed to Brian Albert to tell him to to secure his phone and all contents, SIM cards, etc. as evidence. And Brian Higgins got the same thing, but guess what? Not that they heard about it ahead of time, because we know that wouldn't have happened. They traded in their phones and destroyed their SIM cards the day before. Or 2 days before. Not that anyone in the system there, in the courts, would have, like the grand jury that they impaneled, not that they would have ever been leaked that they were going to go get their cell phones and said, hey, you better get rid of your cell phone because we're going to come and snatch them and do a forensic analysis on it. Because there are other people in the case where they did do a forensic analysis, like Karen Reed's phone and Jen McCabe's phone. Jen McCabe being, I believe, a cousin of the Alberts who was present that night. And they found where she deleted a text. Not everybody in the case agrees, but the expert who was independent, I'm trying to remember his name now, who's the last one to testify, said there was a deleted Google search at 2:27 in the morning that said, quote, "Hos long dying cold," which was meant to be how long dying cold. Now, wow, that is a really strange. Then that same search happened again at 6 something in the morning, 6:27 and 6:30, something like that. And when Jen McCabe was asked about why she Googled that, she said because Karen Reed was so frantic and crazy, and she asked me to Google it, so I did. Yeah, right. When Karen Reed found out that her boyfriend was dead on the lawn of this house, I'm sure the last thing she was thinking about was, oh, I wonder how long it takes to die in the cold. I'm sure at that point was, oh my God, my boyfriend, the now foster dad, if you will, of these 2 children, because what Sean O'Keefe did is, I believe it was either his brother or his sister, they died in a car accident, father and mother, and these kids were now without parents, and he was kind enough to bring them into his home and raise them. And Karen Reed was more or less helping with that. So that's the story as we know it. And the problems I have are, obviously the science of it. But when you lie about one thing, oh, by the way, we talked earlier in the show about the dog bites that were on the arm of John O'Keefe, the officer John O'Keefe, that appeared to be animal bites that were not consistent with getting hit by a vehicle going 24 miles an hour because there were no broken bones, no fractures, and no bruising on the body. There would be big time bruising on the body if you were hit hard enough to fly, as the Commonwealth says, 30 feet in the air. Flew 30 feet in the air, your body's going to have some damage at the point of impact, which is going to be, as those witnesses, the expert witnesses from ARCA, from the state, said it would have had to hit you center mass. It couldn't have just hit your arm. And if it did, it wouldn't look like a freaking dog bite, which is what it looks like. So, when you lie about one thing, it's kind of Judge Judy-esque. Don't believe the things that you say. So I don't believe that they didn't plant evidence of the taillight. There is some photos out there of Jen McCabe's vehicle. Excuse me. I keep confusing Jen McCabe and Karen Reed, which probably both of them would kill me for. Both Jen McCabe and Karen Reed. Karen Reed is the victim in this case. Hashtag free Karen Reed. Hashtag justice for Officer John O'Keefe. There is an image of her at 5-something in the morning when she was going to go look for John, of her vehicle, and you can clearly see the red taillight lens on the right rear taillight is illuminated. And the way that after the police were alone with the vehicle at the Sally Yard in Canton, which was not a state police run facility, but it was the Canton Sallyport, the taillight was destroyed. And wouldn't you know that there is video. Hey, what's going on, Tim? Tim Halloran, how are you? Thank you so much, sir. Tim Halloran is from Delaware. He is the host, along with his beautiful wife, Dana, of Bigfoot Influencers. He is a former baseball scout and an amazing guy. Amazing human being. And documentarian of people who have had influence in the Bigfoot community. Some of which are from Massachusetts, by the way. Not the least of which is Ronnie LeBlanc. So now we have the Karen's vehicle at the Sallyport, and wouldn't you know that the video doesn't work at certain points when the car, so you can't see the car clearly through the whole time, and you can't see what happened. Then you could see that it looks like the broken tail light is on the right, but the video is being filmed through a mirror, because they could see that the number on the garage door was flipped around as if you were looking at it in a mirror, whereas the camera should see the number 4 as number 4 and not a backwards 4. Then you could see someone look like they do some sort of fakakta something with the rear tail light of Karen's car, but it's very bad video, which is probably meant to be that way. And there's also missing video as well. So, also, believe it or not, Karen Reed, when she left that morning to go look for John, you can see where it's an enormous amount of snow, and she backs up and taps John O'Keefe's Jeep with her right rear. Hence the cracked tail light. Not the destroyed tail light, what they eventually showed in court, but just a cracked tail light. But they had to make sure it fit the crime of a tail light hitting a human being holding a rock glass at 24 miles an hour. So the accident reconstructionists went and made a cannon and fired a rock glass at the tail light at 31 miles an hour. And it's just because they couldn't get the pressure just right to make it go 24, but it destroyed the tail light. So the part where it doesn't comport. Hey, Duncan, how are you? Slathering copious amounts of lube, doing what? I don't know what I don't know what he's talking about there, but we're gonna have to put that in timeout because that looks like it was kind of nasty, whatever he was talking about. So anyway, so there's so many things that don't make sense. So even the dog that was alleged to have bitten John O'Keefe on the arm, 7 years, was with the family. That dog, when they asked where's that dog has been rehomed, Brian Albert said on the stand. And by rehomed, I mean probably means that it was euthanized and probably burned and buried somewhere so that it couldn't be used to match the teeth of the dog up to the injuries on John's arm. Because likely the coroner measured those, and you could measure the dog's teeth and see which teeth might have fit perfectly into his arm. And you could do the same with claws. So the dog was rehomed. So Brian Albert got rid of his phone, as did his potential co-conspirator. Yes, I'm a co-conspirator in interesting on-air discussion, as you can see below. Brian Higgins got rid of his phone the same day that Brian Albert did. The dog they got rid of. They even sold the house. And, hey, how's it going? How's it going, Mick? Mick is from the UK. Mick is part of our normal Calling All Beings audience. Not necessarily here for the Karen Reid trial, although there is a gentleman named Dylan who is covering this trial extensively from Wales. I want to see what the name of his show is. Dylan is phenomenal. Dylan and Officer, former retired DEA agent Sean McDonough, who is from the area. Let me see if I gotta try to find trial. There we go. I just want to let you guys know if you want to get in on some of these shows. I'm looking for it now. The Young Jerks is great. Jurks. I just love the Young Jerks. They're awesome. I think we're going to have a hung jury here ultimately. Surviving the Survivor. That one's not it, but that's another great one. There's so many great podcasts that are covering this case. So you have a lot of great information to get you to understand what happened, and there's lawyers on each of them and so forth. I can't find the one with Sean McDonough. Sean McDonough, Karen Reid. There we go. Going Through the Motions. I believe that's it. Okay. So Going Through the Motions. Oh, that's Sean's own podcast, but he's generally on with this guy from the UK, which is really good, and his name is Dylan. So I believe he makes these beautiful, incredible model trains over in the UK. So anyway, sorry I can't help out with that. I'm just kind of jumped into this world recently, and now I'm sort of trying to comment on it. So it's going good, brother. Thank you. Fist bump to you, Mick. Mick is one of the fans of Calling All Beings. We do have a new show that's coming out that's going to be tangentially involved to what we're talking about tonight. But the bottom line, folks, is when it looks like a duck talks and walks like a duck, it's a duck. And that is the reason why all these suspicious things have happened. Why Brian Albert didn't come out of his house to see that a brother officer was dead on his lawn. Why Brian Albert was not interested in what was that. Why the police didn't feel the need to knock on the door of Brian Albert and say, hey, we'd like to talk to you, Sergeant Albert. There is another officer dead on your lawn. I want to see what you know about it. That never happened. Never got all the witnesses in separate rooms down at the State Trooper barracks and questioned them. Brian Albert then got rid of his phone, so there would be no forensic evidence of all the calls he made, all the places. They may have calls. They don't have all the data from his phone, where he went, what he did. You know, there's many things that they could look at, but there's nothing to investigate. And then We hear from Sean McDonough, 35 years in law enforcement, between being he's from Canton. He is a Massachusetts original, and then he had a long career in the DEA and supervisory agent in the DEA. And Sean McDonough says he's heard from people from Canton, he's heard from Mass State Troopers, he's heard from Boston Police. So all three agencies, there have been people and sources that contact Sean McDonough because they know, regardless of the fact that he lives in Naples now, he is one of them. And when you hear him talk, there will be no doubt he's from the greater Boston area. And Sean McDonough says that the feds were involved in this case and were investigating this case very early on, within days after a guy named, I want to say Steve, or was it a guy named Scanlon, former Suffolk County Sheriff with Brian Albert, walked into the office of the defense. He was a former boxing training partner of Brian Albert, walked into the defense's offices, law offices, and said, Karen Reed did not kill Sean O'Keefe, Brian Albert did. And then covered it up and told him there was a fight, blah, 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 and basically talked about what happened. And I don't remember exactly what, you're going to want to listen to Sean McDonough. He's got a lot of information. And he expects that there are sealed indictments that will be opened after this case is finalized, which is probably going to be in a hung jury. Because in America, we don't do consensus. We don't do compromise. We do tribalism. I'm in this camp, you're in that camp. Either Karen Reed's the devil or Brian Albert and Mike Proctor are the devil. Truth is that nobody's the devil. It's just all of the things they did. You can't piss on me and then say, hey, you know what, DJ, it's raining. No, I'm not going to believe you that it's raining. So all the elements of this case point to that there was a cover-up because all the suspicious behavior wouldn't have happened. Anybody watching this case right now, and I'm seeing over 100 of you, anybody in this watching this me speak right now within the sound of my voice knows that if someone were dead on your lawn and it were a colleague of yours, and that could be a colleague at work, anybody, it doesn't have to be a fellow police officer, you are going to run out your front door and go, oh my God, what happened? You're going to talk to the officers on site and go, hey, man, I don't know what happened to this guy. I don't know how he got here. Brian Albert never did that stuff. He never opened that door, because if he would open that door, what if they would have said, hey, look, can we come in, take a look around? Can we turn the lights out, spray luminol, put the black light on, and see if there's any blood splatter in your weight room downstairs where it's alleged by at least Mr. Scanlon that this happened? Any normal police agency would have done that. Because when I went to Dean College, I was a law enforcement major there. And what I learned in administration of the justice is we enforce the law and we follow the law. We enforce the law and we follow the law. And what people like Sean McDonough, who came to this movement after a 35-year career in law enforcement, not only here, but overseas on behalf of the DEA, is that someone who is corrupt and doesn't follow the law as a law enforcement officer makes them look bad unnecessarily. And that's really sad. That's really sad. So with that, I thank you everybody for chiming in and listening and watching. I'm going to try to get, I'll see if I can get, boy, this guy was NYPD in various roles. He was detective. He was SWAT. He's a professor at John Jay College of Criminology. His name is Dr. Keith Taylor. He's now an undersheriff with Suffolk County on Long Island. So I don't know if I can get Dr. Taylor. I just chatted with him tonight. I don't know if in his official role he could comment on this case now, because now he's not a contractor for the government anymore. He worked for Homeland Security. He's done many things, Dr. Taylor. But now he's an undersheriff. So if I could get him on, I will. I'll also have, I have an attorney friend, and the attorney friend is from Massachusetts, and his family, he is connected to the O'Keefe family. So he doesn't want to come on. And he's from the UFO community, but he's also a lawyer, and his family is also connected to the O'Keefe family. So don't know if we're going to get him either. We'll keep looking, and we'll try to get someone from law enforcement and try to get an attorney on. And, you know, hopefully on Monday that the jury will, we're only, 48 hours away, less than that now. Hopefully we will have resolution in this case. Hopefully it will be a not guilty verdict. And hopefully, it's sad that the federal agency has to do this to avoid embarrassment, because it's always the cover-up. Whatever happened to John O'Keefe is something that could have been hopefully fixed. We could explain to his family that there was a little bit of a tussle in the basement and a fight, and he lost his balance, or we hit him and he fell, and the fall was fatal. That's something that you can explain to the family. What you won't be able to explain to the family is if the feds have the goods on some of these players that were involved in this case and are able to prosecute them and prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they did something. Now, how are you going to apologize to the family? Tragic accidents happen. And what you do, car accidents, these things happen. You call 911, you call the police, you call EMS or fire, and you apologize. And maybe your life has changed forever. But it's done so honestly. But once you do something like this, you can never come back from it. You can never be this. People will never look at you the same. So, with that, feeling very pensive. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I look forward to speaking with you again as things progress, because I expect that we are going to have some sort of federal involvement with the Department of Justice after this case is concluded. And I hope only those who have committed acts of fraud or criminal acts are held responsible, and that nobody who's innocently doing their job is caught up in that. So thank you, all you content creators out there in Massachusetts who are covering this case. Thank you to all you law enforcement officers that have to deal with the scorn and scrutiny that you don't deserve, because you're out there honestly doing your job. And then there's some people like this that kind of make it look like all of you are something, when we know that that's not true. Free Karen Reed, a woman that I believe is innocent based on all the things that these guys, the Alberts, did in their family. If they had nothing to hide, they wouldn't have done that. Hey, here's my phone. Sure. Come in, look at the house if you want. Search it. Here's my phone. Here's Brian Higgins' phone. Come on in. Don't even need a search warrant. That's what it is. And by God, man, I want to find out what happened to John. He's a brother officer from my department, from BPD. None of that happened. So what happened? Brian Albert retired. so he could get his pension. Make sure he got that going. Wouldn't be under investigation from Internal Affairs. Retire. Get rid of your phone. Get rid of your dog. Get rid of your house. There's no evidence. Now you can't even go to the house and tear it up, because who knows if there's any. They could have. I'm sure they tore apart everything in that house before they sold it, so that they couldn't find anything. Tear the floors up, the walls, everything's gone. I'm sure. I know it was a weight room, but I'm sure they tore the hell out of that. So all those puzzle mats that were probably on the floor, who knows? So anyway, thank you, everybody. I don't want to babble on further, but thank you. I appreciate it. We'll come back. We'll talk about this as we go forward. Hopefully there'll be a verdict. And in addition to that, we will, in the aftermath, if there is a federal investigation into the dishonest brokers that are in this case. Thank you. Peace out.